Good evening, everyone. I'm Kym. Thank you so much for the introduction, Stephanie. It's so wonderful to be in this space. We're excited to be here with all of you. We're going to kick off because we've got a lot to get through and we want to be able to have a conversation at the end. So we're going to kind of move through the slides fairly swiftly, try and follow along. We're happy to share the resources afterwards, but we want to give everyone an orientation around the topic before we delve into the nitty-gritty. We are going to be dealing with themes surrounding disability, colonialism, childism, and racism. So if you need to take a breather, please do. We will be running through the orientation slides quickly to leave room for more communal discussion. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please write them in the chat box. If you have any comments at the end for folks to have intercommunal discussion, as we said before, and I'll hand it over to Jumoke and she's going to explain what we're going to do next.
Hello, everyone. So we will be using this website platform called Mentimeter. So you should be able to see the link. Hopefully we can get that put into the chat. And then there's an access code on the screen as well. So we'll be going through, as Kym said, quite quickly, a number of questions. The very first one being, what are you hoping to get out of this session? So yes, the link has just been put in the chat. If everybody can just click through.
You can say anything. You can say anything. Don't feel restricted. Here to learn.
You need to turn that off, my guy.
I don't know what I'm turning off.
Oh, well, it's off now, so it's okay.
Yes, it wasn't. I don't think it was me.
Okay.
Community connection, a space to share and learn, be inspired and challenged and not sure. That's good. Learn new things. Sisterhood. Oh, I love that. Educate myself. If everyone could mute themselves, that would be helpful. Interconnectedness. Oof. Disability justice vibes. My background's more mental health, so intersecting issues, community connection, to not feel so alone in the work we have to do. Fair. Safe space from white people. Here for the vibes. I'm here for the vibes. Have we reached 1 minute yet, Jimmy?
Yeah, I think just...
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question, which is, using the same link, name some taboo topics within the Black community.
So this can be anything, as Kym said earlier. Don't feel shy, like this is all anonymous. We're just going to see the answers pop up.
So it should have changed on your screen too, but just in case, I'm going to put the QR code back up so you can see. So you can scan that if you... The link in the chat still works, so it should have changed screen now and you should be able to put some stuff in.
Yeah.
No one is responding. Come on. Come on.
Maybe they're so taboo, they can't even possibly write it through Menti.
If you cannot see the changed screen, let us know in the chat as well. I sent something, but it hasn't come up. Okay, don't worry about it. We'll just go back. We'll go back in. That's not a problem. There you go. It was my screen. So we've got loads: queerness, mental health, sex, neurodivergence, abuse, gayness, queerness, mental health, loads of mental health, sex when disabled, autism, neurodivergent stuff, atheism, yes, mental health outside of depression and anxiety, disability, queerness, divisions in Caribbean and African communities, dignity, indignity, physical vulnerability. It's a lot of stuff. Okay, cool. Next one. And this is the last one for now. Guys. So I don't know what's going on. Okay, let's go. Next one. What 3 words come to mind when you think of disability? We've got 1 minute left for this one. It says waiting for responses. I don't believe it. It's been lying to us. Ah, there you go. Struggle. Let's go. Ableism. Creative. Oh, I can't read all these.
Hardship. Barriers. Mutual aid. Loneliness. Inaccessibility. Frustration. Judgment. Strength. Poverty. Overlooked. Discrimination. And adaptation.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to move on.
And one last one, ostracization.
Okay. So let me go back to present. This has not done. Where's the, okay, let's go to slideshow and present. So let's just go through some basics. So disability and ableism, we're going through the crucial definitions. Disability has multiple individual, structural and cultural definitions. So the Equalities Act in the UK describes disability or a disabled person as a person with a disability, and a person has a disability for the purposes of the Act if he or she, they or them, has a physical or mental impairment, and the impairment has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on his or her ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities, right? And if you look at within the Act, you can also see that gender expansive folks aren't included in this wording. And so we're already meeting barriers for certain people, right? Disableism. So disableism, sometimes called ableism, is discrimination or prejudice against disabled people. It can be defined as discriminatory, oppressive, abusive behavior arising from the belief that disabled people are inferior to others. Disableism refers to prejudice, stereotyping, or institutional discrimination against disabled people. Ableism, which is often used in place of disableism, places the emphasis of discrimination in favor of non-disabled people. So rather than saying, okay, it's prejudice against disabled people, they say it's prejudice for or towards, in favor of the non-disabled person. So based on the definition we just read, do you know anyone with a disability? We've got 30 seconds to answer this one. And we're going to go back to here and we're going to change this one. Yes, no. Many folks. Cool. We love this interaction. There are 3. Wonderful. It says 15 responses, but we can't see them all. That's fine. It was a
Most
general
of the answers
question.
will be yes or no. So.
Yeah. So it's good to know who's in the room and what you recognize from what we've read. Let's move on. So let's talk about group socialization. So we are here in a community event, right? So it's important that we talk about some of the factors that affect what we understand as community. So group socialization is the social pressure for people to conform to cultural norms. What are our collective cultural responses to disability? Group socialization can often lead to intracommunal endorsement of violence. So within these dynamics, those who identify as belonging to the same group, so non-disabled Black adults, give each other the benefit of the doubt when harm is witnessed, when ignorance is witnessed, when minimizing is witnessed. And they also minimize the observed harm being committed by their peers, right? That's part of group socialization. So the experience then of the perpetuation of trauma becomes ingrained in culture. And if it goes on for long enough, it becomes ingrained in genes. So this is a question for folks who have disabilities, and you can still respond to this whilst we move on to the next slide. If you have a disability, what has your experience been with interacting with your family and or community? Let's go. So I'm going to leave that one open and the responses will come in, but we're going to move on to the next slide because, as we said, we're trying to get through these so we can have a conversation. So we're looking at disability within Black culture. That's part of the conversation that we're having here, right? So there is a relationship between culture and perceived notions of power. This can heavily impact the formulation of communal goals and behaviors. Although attitudes to gender, power, and dominance differ over time and culture, the dominance and power of colonizing nations, as well as their cultures, have remained central to and continue to shape much of the Black existence at home and abroad. So to break that down a little bit, we have to talk about what that looks like, right? So through religion, and colonialism and their context within disability models. So models of disability, for those who do not know, are how we describe and understand disability, and often they reflect how these understandings are expressed within societal systems and structures, which in turn affects culture. If you have any questions about anything or you're not sure, you want us to revisit things, please write that in the chat. So colonialism carried with it certain ideas about how the world should be ordered, what and whom should be counted as having value, as well as who was human within it. At the time of colonization, religion was all the rage, and the Spanish Inquisition of the 15th century had laid excellent foundations for how religion could be used to exert political power with impunity. Right? So if you think about the things, how much you know about the Spanish Inquisition, people were getting witch hunted for not adhering to particular religious beliefs. They were being tortured, they were being murdered, they were being starved, they were being killed. And it was a long campaign, very, very funded and backed by and led by the religious institution we know as the church, which was a political power. So it had proven to be a powerful tool. So religion had proven to be a powerful tool for cultural re-education around human hierarchies, because no one can argue with tyranny mandated by God, right? So how does this fit into disability and what does this look like? So one of the oldest models of disability is found in the moral model, right? So, and it was rooted really in people's religious beliefs. So it's found in a number of religious traditions, including Judeo-Christian tradition. And according to one of the primary forms of moral and religious models of disability, disability should be regarded as punishment from God for a particular sin or sins that may have been committed by the person with the disability or their ancestors. Another prominent version of this is that disabilities are a test of faith and can bring salvation. And that disability as a test of faith means that if you then are chosen to receive a disability and are given the opportunity to redeem yourselves through endurance and prayer and piety and belief and faith, if you are not able to be healed from that, it could mean that you have a lack of faith in God, right? So the onus of your continued suffering within the systems that are hostile to you is your own fault. Does this sound familiar? You can just type that in the chat. It should do. If it doesn't, you're lying. So religion, colonialism, and capitalism, right? Religion was a key feature of colonial conquest and enslavement. So Africans were taught that their subservience was God's will, connecting their lot and lineage to Noah's eternally cursed grandson, who was cursed to be in servitude forever, so a slave forever, Canaan, right? And religion was used to enforce sociocultural ideas and understandings of the European worldview. So Africans were considered, when Westerners came to the continent, Europeans came to the continent to colonize, when they had the idea to colonize, one of the ways in which they sold it was by saying that Africans were savage and infant, like children, and in need of taming and instruction. So we see the pathologization of Black existence as a principal tenet of European religion and colonialism, right? So in a British historical context, these ideas come from the Elizabethan, Stuart, Gregorian, and Victorian periods, a time when the number of people dying was greater, at least 75% of births were ending in death in these sides of the world. The number of people dying was higher than the number of people who were being baptized. People were taking baths maybe once or twice a year. They were washing their faces with spit, and sewage filled the streets. So we have to understand that a lot of these ideas came from those particular societies, a lot of the ideas which we still hold dear. So the Christian church was heavily involved in the pursuit of power and heavily funded colonization efforts, right, through cultural re-education, and that would power the foundations of capitalism rather. So here's another question for you, now that we've just covered that little bit. How many years do you think it would take for you to save 1 billion? Let's move to that beautiful screen that I keep skipping past, and let's change this one. How many years? So we've got between 1,000 and 27,000 years. Tell us.
And this is if you were to save £100 per day.
Okay, let's see, where are these numbers? I don't even know what this represents. Well, not 27,000. This one, let's see. Okay, they're going in the thousands. So most people think it would take them a long time. Fair.
And Kym and
Yeah.
Jumoke, could I get you just to speak a little more slowly? Just for
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so most people are erring in the top half, close to 27,000. So we're looking at tens of thousands of years. Wow, nobody has wild dreams here. Everyone just understands how money works. Brilliant. That's good. I mean, you're not as delusional as me then. So it would take 27,397.26 years to save £1 billion if you were saving £100 per day. So that's £700 a week. And you can calculate the amount for a month. I'm not doing maths today. So the reason why we mention that is because it's important to contextualize the drive for ableism that exists within capitalism. They can't be separated. And also looking at how capitalism forming the foundations of enslavement as well as ableism are linked. So in 1833, £20 million was earmarked to be paid to slave owners, representing a basic value for the labour capacity of Caribbean slaves freed in 1833. The value for the labour capacity of Caribbean slaves freed in 1833 is around £6 billion in today's money, right? Think about what we just saw. 1 billion would take 27,000 years, right, to save up if you were saving £700 a week in today's money. In those days, just as an aside, the average upper class Englishman the yearly salary was around £700 a year. A year. Okay. So it makes sense that those two things are tied together, because why on earth would you want to have a system where people are not able to provide you years and years and years of money? By the way, this picture below was taken in 1896, and it is of, the Europeans called them Ascari, and they were essentially, the Ascari soldier is holding what are known as African slaves. They're actually on the continent of Africa in 1896. So sometimes when we hear about abolition, I think we think that stuff just stopped. And it did not. So we'll come back to the money side of things, but that's just contextualizing. Childism, ableism, and Blackness. So we're going through a lot of concepts today, so just bear with us. It's just so that we'll have an idea of what we're talking about generally. The concept of childism was first developed in the field of psychoanalysis to describe the phenomenon of prejudice against children. It took the notion of prejudice from studies of sexism, racism, classism, and the like, and applied it to the cross-cutting discrimination that children experienced because of their age. In childhood studies, it is often meant in analogy to concepts like feminism and posthumanism to refer to children's empowerment, but we're using it in terms of recognizing discrimination. So we know that children remain unprotected from all forms of violence and domination from both society and within their homes and communities. They are subjected to all types of abuse and disenfranchisement on both a state and familial level. They have no agency, no fair representation, and face discrimination on a daily basis from systems and structures. In Black families, they experience the highest rates of violence and harsh punishment than any other demographic, and they have little to no recourse, are silenced, and rarely experience justice, right? I want you to keep in mind what we said earlier about Europeans coming to the continent and describing Africans as childlike. So the intersections of childism and Blackness. So colonial ideas surrounding Black Africans place them in the same category of of Europe's disenfranchised children. So this conflation has far-reaching consequences, even though if they were placed in the same place, Africans would not be seen as equal to those children, but it's the ideologies surrounding how at the time Europeans viewed and treated children within their societies that were superimposed onto Black existence. The law has also been instrumental in ensuring Black people's continued dehumanization and exposure, not lack of exposure to violence. So in the same way that children are unprotected and the law has not supported them, is the same way that the law has been instrumental in continuing to dehumanize and oppress Black folks. An example of those two things intersecting is the Casual Killing Act of 1669. So a law which emerged from the phenomenon of white women killing Black children in unprecedented numbers. And so it was created to absolve the slave owners of any sin. So they could not be prosecuted for damaging their, at the time, property, or be seen as having been immoral, because it was only Black folks and Black children in particular. But also one of the things was, if they were seen to have, the children were to have died during being corrected, punished, tortured, all of those things, it was not to be seen as negative. After all, these are savages who need taming. The children and the adults hold the same kind of social status in terms of whether they are seen as valuable or precious, right? This draws parallels to perceptions and treatment of disabled folks. Often, for those who have the experience of disability, you are very well aware of the idea that disabled people are seen as childlike, lacking intellect. They're often denied rights and agency, autonomy, equity, and they're fair game for the frustrations of society and whoever. So we see here that racism, childism, and ableism are interlinked. And we've written there, you cannot be liberated from one without ensuring liberation for the other. Wow, we are definitely ahead of time. This is good, because then we can have a longer conversation, which is what we want to do, because I'm seeing the chat is filled with stuff. So Jumoke and Stephanie, you have a lot of things to do. Okay, so ableism and mental health. This is not, we're not going into depth in anything, by the way. We're just giving a general overview to give us some orientation, as we said. So disability is often associated with, again, childlike capacity or underdevelopment, and therefore near complete agency is removed from the individual, and forced sterilization, confinement to asylums, tranquilization, lobotomization, abuse, and death have been prescribed as remedies. Just out of, as an aside, women in European history, at least for a long time, inhabited some of that category of being seen as being devoid of a certain level of intellect. They were also confined to asylums for bucking against the social norms. They were subject to tranquilization and lobotomization and abuse. Lobotomization, for those who do not know, is where you have someone cut open your head and fiddle around with your brain. Sometimes they remove parts of the brain, and it can leave you permanently brain damaged or alter your personality completely. And at the time they were doing these things, we didn't have the kinds of standards that folks might consider to be ethical now. Drapetomania. So we're moving to a different aspect of quote unquote mental health. So drapetomania was the pseudo-scientific diagnosis offered for enslaved Africans who tried to escape the miseries of slavery through the powerful act of running away. And just as an aside, the person, I'm calling them a person, who came up with this diagnosis, there are no records of them going to medical school. The place that they said they went to study doesn't have them on record or anything. And they came up with a few more profitable diagnoses for enslaved people at the time, because medicine was a very good way to gain notoriety. So back to the links with colonial ideas of Black people being non-human, right? Childlike savages. It was inconceivable for them to seek liberation. In addition, the link to capitalism is undeniable, right? Runaway investments are defective goods. And essentially, it's almost like white folks were running, oh wow, that is a hilarious typo, were running cons on each other, and Black people were collateral, subject to collateral damage, because essentially if I'm able to say that you have defective goods, your goods will not be as valuable as someone else. And also we need to explain why, you know, I'm not able to retain my goods. And so it must be something fundamentally, psychologically wrong with them, and therefore they need fixing, right? So if we come to modern times, we find that we have things like schizophrenia, which is a real mental health condition. It's a long-term mental health condition, and it causes a range of different psychological symptoms. And it's important to note that it does not usually cause someone to be violent. And this is relevant, which we'll come back to in a moment. So research indicates that racial bias in diagnosis has resulted in Black people being disproportionately diagnosed and misdiagnosed with schizophrenia. Don't worry, Jess, we're coming to that. So ableism, mental health, and Blackness. So racism is recognized as an adverse childhood experience, along with poverty, food insecurity, tragedy, and abuse, and more, right? Who's Faith? That was interesting. So adverse childhood experiences, which are negative, traumatic things that happen in our childhood that can affect, they can affect our development and cause psychological problems, physiological ailments, and things like that in childhood and also in later life. There is extensive research about this, about the impact of trauma on even gray matter, right, in children, and how that affects them psychosocially. So what's also interesting is that trauma-related dissociative symptoms, which mimic schizophrenia, are prevalent in minoritized communities who are also facing socioeconomic disadvantage. So we said earlier, racism is an adverse childhood experience, and those experiences can genuinely affect you physiologically and psychologically, right? And interpersonally. So it would make sense that you'd have a reaction to that. So, just as an additional thing, studies suggest a direct pathway from developmental trauma to psychotic phenomena in adults. It's an addition, right? What we know is that mental health conditions and mood disorders can increase disability, and disability can increase mental health conditions and mood disorders, because we are living in a hostile environment subject to racism, ableism, sexism, all of the isms. So not only are you being always constantly bucking up against the system because you're socioeconomically impacted as well as interpersonally impacted and structurally impacted, you then face consequences for that, right? Cyclically. So health and social care systems, however, still remain inequitable, and there is much bias that exists within them. So even with all of this stuff that we know, and even if we want to say that there are genuine mental health concerns, everything becomes convoluted because of these different isms interplaying with one another, right? And it's no surprise that Black people are 3 times as likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act. So just before I say the last point, we sometimes do not consider the fact, we talked about ableism before, and that disabled people were seen as childlike and therefore deserve to be institutionalized, lobotomized, and all those things. That still happens, right? So here we see where Black people are more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act as an act of violence from institutions. Sometimes they may need it, but they're, as we said, racism and these other systems of oppression are interplaying. And these ideas, these archaic ideas of what Black people represent, cause racism and ableism to interplay, right? And so we see criminalization, institutionalization, and disposal of Black folks occurring in tandem. Who else do we dispose of in society and within our communities? Disabled people, right? So your destinies are intertwined. Let's see. Good. So second to last, Blackness, disability, and queerness. So based on everything that we have talked about and some of the orientation, which we'll go through later, some of the discussion, disability can be said to be queer in the context of our present world, and we're using it in the sense that Bell Hooks uses it, and the quote is, queer not as being about who you're having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer as in being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live, right? To be Black in white supremacist, imperialist, capitalist, patriarchal worlds is to be queer and at odds with everything around you, right? And by virtue, because of these things, it's imperative that we are ferocious, not just about protecting our queer identity as folks who are at odds with the world based on the worldview that's been superimposed onto the world through colonialism, but we also need to protect our queer siblings who are a tangible manifestation of our Blackness, right? And who are often at the forefront of our quest to liberation. I think we will stop there for now so that we can have the 10-minute break earlier, and that will give us more time for the rest. Stephanie, how are we doing? I told you I was going to do it earlier.
Amazing, great. So if we break now, fantastic.
So our next question up on the screen via Mentimeter is, which group or groups do you think were most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? So I'll give you a minute to just think of some answers. As per usual, the link is still the same. So it's still the same one you were using before.
And just to say, in this section, in this half, if you have something to say, please raise your hands and we'll be looking for folks who have things to contribute. After we go through these questions, then we'll open the floor.
So just a few more seconds. Okay, I'll read some of the answers you've put through so far. So we have disabled people, Black people, East Asian people, women, the elderly, frontline workers, and one of the options put there were rich white men. I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to keep it cute. Yes. So thank you so much. Let's see. We're about to move on to the next question. Which groups were 30 times more likely to die of COVID and were disproportionately given DNRs, so these are do not resuscitate orders, than the average population? Now, a DNR is an order that somebody usually requests as opposed to being forced upon them, where they request no extraordinary measures be made to save them. So far, we have a majority of the people voting for young people with learning disabilities, followed by elderly people in care homes, then Black and ethnic minority frontline workers. Got a comment in here saying that somebody received a DNR in 2020, but they didn't request. Yes, during the COVID pandemic, we did see that people were having DNR orders put forward to them as opposed to being requested. And that tells us sends a very clear message as to those that are presumed to not want to try and fight and keep on living, those that medicine essentially didn't want to fight for, didn't consider worthy of medicine, of the science. Okay, so majority of the people, 56%, chose young people with learning disabilities. So, excuse me, on this section, we have listed here the disability justice principles as put forward by the disabled group Sins Invalid. So the 10 are intersectionality, leadership of those most impacted, anti-capitalism and an anti-capitalist politic, cross-movement solidarity, wholeness, sustainability, cross-disability solidarity, interdependence, collective access, and collective liberation. So these principles put forward by Sins Invalid can tell us a lot about what we would require in order to be able to achieve Black liberation. We have to ensure that we are looking after, like if we say that Black Lives Matter, we have to ensure that we're saying that all Black Lives Matter, that Blackness in all of its iterations will be welcomed, will be looked after, will be cared for. Those that are queer, those that are disabled, those that are dark-skinned, those that are fat, those that might be asylum seekers, those that aren't the upheld ideal, those that aren't, excuse me, those that aren't able, quote unquote, or not yet disabled, rather. So what we need to think about and what we need to consider is that these principles are those that we should all be guided by, those within the Black community, but just as a human race. But certainly if we do hope to be liberated, we can't do it without cross-disability solidarity. We can't seek to go it alone. We can't seek to go forth and decide that actually we'll come back to you. It's either we all go together all at once, whether we are walking, whether we are rolling ourselves in our wheelchair, whether we are crawling, whether we have to lay in bed. In order to be able to do that, we have to ensure that it is for the collective, that we aren't seduced by individual liberation, because that is not liberation. We simply won't get there. And one of my favorite principles there is the second one, leadership of those most impacted. So those that are most affected by the brutal systems and institutions, those are the people that are best situated and have the best tools in order to be able to guide us out of the mess that we're in. I'm going to keep it cute. I'm not going to swear.
Just to add to Jumoke's point, based on all that we have glanced through or learned earlier, it should be evident that in order for us to achieve Black liberation, we have to incorporate disability justice as a foundational principle within it, because of those intersections, right, of the way in which Blackness and disability occur in society. A lot of the oppressions that are faced have occurred in tandem, right? Blackness perceived as other, disability perceived as other, and the consequences of being perceived as other within these societies are similar. But not only that, right? We recognize that as Black folks, we exist in dynamic bodies and environments with a range of cultural, I guess, relevancies that will affect the way in which we navigate the world. And so it's important that when we are thinking about moving forward, about creating a world where we have revolutionized or destroyed some of these systems, that we create a world where all of us will be present. And as Jumoke said, none of us will be left behind, because it is in the leaving behind and excluding that Blackness itself and Black people themselves become excluded from the same systems they think they are trying to build, right? Every time you think that this applies to a disabled person or that disabled Black person and not me, it comes to bite you in the behind, like we've seen with the disproportionate invoking of the Mental Health Act, right? When it was folks who were in the community and we considered to not be good representatives of Blackness, it was okay for them to be institutionalized against their will, right? These are hard conversations, I know. It was okay, we could watch that and we could just say, oh, well, they should have done better and they should have lived right. We weren't thinking about, sorry, I'll slow down, the trauma, we weren't thinking about the systems of oppression that are affecting us all violently, right? We were not thinking about the lack of care, about the inequities. But when it is our young sons and daughters who are subject to police violence and conspiracy and all of those things, suddenly mental health and these institutions that have been used to oppress disabled folks matter. When it comes to even benefits, suddenly they matter. And we have to really think about not replicating the master systems. The whole point of their systems was to exclude and to marginalize and to capitalize off and destroy. I'd love for us to go into the financial side of things, but we won't do that for now. I think, Jumoke, let you move on. But I just wanted to reiterate that.
Okay, so as some of you may know, those that have heard us speak before, the Triple Cripples are working on a living archive. Now, the living archive is a multimedia archive that we are hoping to create that will uplift and amplify the lives and voices of those that are already here. We don't want to be seduced by the exceptionalism, the most amazing Paralympians, the top echelons of those that are doing amazing and wonderful things while disabled, but recognizing the fact that disabled people that are here right now, living their lives, have stories worth sharing and histories that we want to record. And we want to ensure that this is a loving affirmation of those that are yet to come. The work that we're seeking to do aims to support the upliftment of Black disabled women and gender expansive people with experiences within an often hostile world, and offer representation to those who are unrepresented due to sexism, ableism, and racism. It's an exhibition that we intend to hold at varying stages of our research, and we're hoping to showcase new excerpts from the archive online, but also in person in different continents in Europe, South America, and Africa. The Living Archive is not just an affirmation of our existence and of those that are also hidden from view, but a rich data resource. Because without data, it is near impossible in our modern world to develop strategies, interventions, policies, and structures that will serve our communities. Now, for those of us that are living in the UK, you know they love a good piece of research. They love a review. They want to review the review. So for us, it's important to collect this data because so far The data looks at Blackness, and it looks at disability, and it looks at women, but it doesn't bring all of that information together. And that is what we are seeking to do so as to best serve our communities. We're hoping to use it as an educational tool to shift mainstream understandings of race, gender, and disability inequities and inequalities. And it will be led by those that do have the lived experience and backed by decolonized approaches to scholarship. We're intending to center the voices and experiences of those in the margins and shift the narratives for the wider global Black community, because it is through these stories and the telling of these stories and the sharing of these stories that we can actually hope to move ourselves forward. Because often, especially with Black people, we're told that we have no history, that we have no culture, that we have no civilization, but it was all either hidden, stolen, burnt, and we're hoping to have this living archive showcase the myriad of Black lives and Black livelihoods and Black futures that there abound. Next slide, please. I love saying that. So yes, the floor is open. Let's chit chat. Please use the hand raise option, and yeah, let's talk.